Welcome to the Exploring the Coast virtual event hosted by UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. So as an organization, we contribute to healthy coastal ecosystems and communities through research, extension, and education. So I'm excited that you'll get to meet one of our educators, John Crawfish Crawford, who has been exploring the coast and these habitats for much of his life. So we are in for a real treat to get to take a photographic tour and learn some of his stories and information. And I also wanted to introduce my colleague, Ipsita Tingy, who will also be moderating. So you'll see both of our names in the chat box. So if you have any questions, ask away. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah. Well, hi, folks. This is, I want you all to please bear with me. This is a new thing for me to actually sort of have a field trip into the wild online. I have done recorded programs before, but this is my first attempt at a live interactive field trip. So please bear with me, and we'll get started here. So I am nervous. Anyway, my name is John Crawford, and I grew up in Savannah, and you feel very fortunate in having grown up in one of the wildest areas in the country. Well, I think one of the most beautiful in the whole world. Now, I might be partial, but the coast of Georgia is spectacular. It's not as, in a really subtle way, you might want to say. There's beauty everywhere you look, and we're blessed with a very wild coastline. It takes a boat ride to get out to most of the islands. We have only 3 islands that you can get to by vehicle. That the wildness of the coast is because of the remoteness, and also because of the fact that some owners of it wanted it protected, and a lot of it is in federal or state land now. So anyway, without further ado, here we go. Georgia's coast is wild, it's subtle. It is a beautiful place. It's tide driven, and let's see. There we go. It's tidal driven, and the tides here, well, I assume everyone knows that tides are caused by the gravitational pull of the sun and the moon. The moon being a lot closer, it has a greater effect on our tides. And so a full moon, when you have the sun and the moon in a straight line, you might say, and new moon, that's also the case. We have the highest range of tides, and that's called spring tides. And when they're at 90 degrees to each other at the first or last quarter or anything in between, we call that neap tides. And that's when the least amount of water moves in and out. And we have what's called semi-diurnal tides here. We're right here. This is the coast. This is Georgia right now. And we're located about right there. And if we have, most of the world has semi-diurnal tides. That's 2 highs and 2 lows within a 24-hour period. Not everywhere is like that. Right over here on the Gulf Coast, part of Florida and Alabama and some Mississippi, they have what's called diurnal tides there, and the tide comes in and goes out roughly 12 hours. So there's basically one tide each day, and one high and low tidal cycle, I should say. They don't have a very high tidal range there either. But we have the highest tidal range right along the coast here in Georgia, and that is the difference between high tide and low tide. Anywhere on the east coast of the country south of Cape Cod, which is way up there, and if you got to go down to South America to find a place that has a higher tidal range. And the reason for that is the shape of the coastline. You have, this is North Carolina here, Cape Hatteras, and you see the coastline curves westward down into Florida Peninsula. And that big curve, the area incorporated in that curve is called the Georgia Bight. Some authors call it the South Atlantic Bight, which is sort of confusing for me, but I like the name Georgia Bight. But this curve in the coast is like the edge of a big basin, you might say. If you have water in a big round basin of water and you rock it back and forth, the water starts washing back and forth, and then it'll spill over the edge, sort of at the center of one of the curves of the basin. That's what happens here. As the tides come in, water splashes over the edge here, and water sort of is forced into here from both sides, so it sort of squeezes in. And also, you see this light pattern right there? That is called the continental shelf, and we have a gradually sloping continental shelf. That's where the waters get deeper and deeper. This is about the 100-fathom curve, it's just called. And that means that's about 600 feet deep right up there. This is several thousand feet deep, and then it gets deeper up there. But this gradual slope at one time was dry land. In fact, just 18,000 years ago, the coastline was way out here, about 300 feet lower than it is today. And of course, we hear a lot about sea level rise, which is happening. And when you live close to sea level here, we'll talk about that a little bit more. You can see this actually happening every day. And I'm 71 years old now and grew up here. And in my lifetime, I've seen entire small islands disappear under the rising sea level. Now, it comes up maybe just a little over 3 millimeters a year, but over a lifetime, that's quite a bit. And over a century, that can come up maybe a foot or more. But sea level here in the last 18,000 years has fluctuated about 300 feet. So as the Earth's warm, it's still warming, so sea level is still rising. But you can see this area here is a broad area of shallow water. So anyway, all of these get together. Also, the proximity of a lot of water helps give us a mild coastline. Oh, the wrong way, sorry. All right, this is satellite imagery of the state of Georgia in the infrared spectrum. That means it's seeing the warmth of objects. And the color here, the darker the color means the more vegetation we have. And this is Okefenokee Swamp down there. But we have a broad area. We have mountains in North Georgia. And if you're familiar, some of you may be up from that way right now, but these are mountains. We have the Piedmont Plateau right here. This area, you can see a definite change. That's called the fall line. And the fall line is the extent to which the sea reached inland. At one time, the sea level went right along there, which is several hundred feet above us presently. Again, we're right down here on the coast of Georgia. But the materials up here are rocky with soil in between, but they've been eroding. The Appalachians are some of the oldest mountains in the world, and they've been eroding for a very long time. And the material from here, which eroded rock, transported down across some of the plateau, and then down here on the coastal plain is what we call it. This coastal plain is all sedimentary material, and that means materials that were basically rock that was eroded and broke down into tiny little pieces, sand. So we have sand, clay, which is also eroded rock, and limestones in this area. If you look down here along the coast, you can see a string of barrier islands here. We have some rivers in Georgia that are really cool. This is the Savannah River, and it goes all the way up to the mountains. This is the Ogeechee River, which is really mainly a coastal plain river. We have the Altamaha, which goes to here, and it's got the Ohoopee, the Oconee River, and the Old Mulgee Rivers, and Macon sits right in there. Augusta's there, Columbus, Georgia's over there. And they're all right along the fall line. And one of the reasons they're there is the fact that if you have waterfalls, and that's where the fall line gets its name, water coming off the edge of this plateau tumbled down over steep banks to the coastal plain, and there were a series of waterfalls. And if you can have waterfalls, you can have a business that uses water energy to grind corn or to work machinery. So there were a number of population centers along here. So coming down to the coast here again, we'll see this is Skidaway Island. That's where we are. I'm right now, right up there on that little point of Skidaway. But we have a string of barrier islands out here that are right on the face of the sea. And then we have behind them, we have another string of islands that are inland a little bit now. And those are called back barriers. And they were barrier islands when sea level was slightly higher, maybe about 5 feet higher than it is now. But then it dropped low, and we had a we had offshore, we had islands and all sorts of habitat were out there that are now underwater. The green area here is very important to the coastal process. That is called what people call wetlands now, but they used to be called, alluvial swamp, cypress hole, cypress pond, Procosin, gum slough. There were names describing these wetland habitats, oxbow lakes. A lot of those names have been lost in common use now, and I have a mission to try to get people to start using them again. So I'll get it down, Pat. But just to speed up a little bit, erosion in the mountains can take place by several things. It takes water to transport the material, but to break rock up, water can freeze during winters and rocks can break apart. Things like lichens that grow in rocks will actually dissolve them away and help create sand. That material is transported down fast-moving mountain streams over the Piedmont Plateau, down those waterfalls to the coastal plain. And then the rivers take on a different character. They're broad, they're slow-moving, sandy bottom, and they're surrounded on each side by swamp. And this swampland is very important to coastal processes. Again, the sand traveling from the mountains down to the coast takes its time. It can take thousands of years for some of it to go all the way to where the coast is now. There's evidence. Remember, I said sea level at one time was several hundred feet higher than it is today. And we have evidence inland. This is along the Savannah River. This is called Shell Bluff. And what you're looking at there is a fossil oyster bed. And there are fossil oysters there that were 2 feet long. So there, if you needed an oyster, if you had an oyster roast, you'd only need about one oyster, to cook. But they're really impressive fossils here along the coast. Again, transporting that material, the sand, clay, and limestone. The limestone doesn't move so much on our coast. It's in southwest Georgia, and we'll get to talk about that in a few minutes. But the sand and clay make up the river bottoms, and the silt or the clay moves with the river floods, moves into the surrounding lowlands that become called river swamp, and the soils there are a little boggy, anaerobic. That means they don't have much oxygen. And we have trees that can live and exist there, such as cypress, really a beautiful type of habitat. Now, also along the coast, we have changing habitats that humans did. And some of that river swamp was actually cleared in the 1700s. Dikes were built. And rice was grown, and they changed a lot of river swamp habitat into rice fields. And this ended after the Civil War in the 1880s. It pretty much was all gone now. And those fields have gone fallow. They're returning to river swamp, and some of them are wildlife refuges now. But, of course, following that grain of sand down the coast, tumbling along the bottom, it gets washed past vast areas of salt marsh. We do have freshwater marshes inland, but then when you get down closer to where we are now, there are vast marshes. Some of them are 8 miles across, dominated by one species of plant called smooth cordgrass. And it is a vast and important area that we're blessed with most of the tall Spartina grass marshes in the country in Georgia. And eventually that grain of sand tumbles on out into the ocean, down rivers. And when it gets close to the coast, remember I said we have the highest tidal range south of Cape Cod. We regularly will have tides we get over 10-foot differences in tides here during certain phases of the moon. The moon sometimes is closer to the earth than others, and so the tides are higher at that time. But the tides move sand in and out of the channels. Wind, storms can do that also. And then floods. Floods can move a lot of sand. So we do have sand tumbling around the coast, very and formed into different shapes. This is the north end of Ossabaw Island, and you can see a series of parallel dunes here with marshes in between, and the sandbars that are offshore. The sand here is mainly quartz, but there are other minerals involved in it also. Now, this other habitat, this sandy ribbon of sand along the coast, which is very dynamic. It gets eroded away. It gets moved back and forth easily. But there are animals that need it. And one of my favorite animals here are the sea turtles. And this is a loggerhead sea turtle that's come ashore to nest. And this is a rare, and most of it is in there in the middle of the night. But this is a rare one that was on the beach at dawn. And I put tags. You can see the tag here on it. We tag them and measure them. And they come up to nest and go back out to sea. They don't start nesting until they're about 35 years old. So it's a very slow maturation period. But this female might nest every 2 years, or sometimes 3, and she might make 4 or more nests in one season. But she, who knows how old she is, how long she's been. We're doing DNA studies now. We have, recently we had a mother, a daughter, and a grandmother all nesting the same year. And that meant the grandmother had to be 35 when she had her daughter, laid the egg that became her daughter, who was about 35 before she laid the egg that became the granddaughter. And it's pretty impressive to think of them using the beaches here. Their numbers are going up. They're increasing in numbers. We've been protecting them for quite a long while, and it's paying off. And the DNR now considers the population of loggerhead turtles at near recovery or above recovery period on our coast. It's taken a lot of work for about 45 years, but we've made a difference. So those are really cool animals, and they're nesting right now out there. So other really interesting animals that sometimes people miss, these are horseshoe crabs. And horseshoe crabs are really not crabs. They're related to spiders and scorpions. They're in a group called the Chelicerata, but they come up to nest by the millions on the coast and by the thousands in any one particular area. They do this at spring tides. Again, they're working on the tides, and they come up at the highest tides of the month, starting in about late April and May and in early June. The females crawl up to the high tide line. Males hang on to the back of the shell. When the female digs a hole and lays her eggs, the males fertilize them, and then they go back out, and they may return in the next spring tide. But the eggs develop right at the high tide line, in moist sand, and traveling birds, migrating birds such as the red knot, the sanderlings, ruddy turnstones. I love that name, a ruddy turnstone. It's a cool name. But they depend on millions and millions of eggs, and one female can lay about 90,000 eggs in one season for nutrition. And as they're migrating, some of them, like the red knot, coming from the very southern tip of South America, they're going to the Arctic near the North Pole up there, in northern Canada, and they need to recharge from the long flight from South America. So they depend on these eggs for subsistence, and they're very important for them. Interestingly enough, many animals eat them. I found big alligators eating them. Raccoons will feed on them. Hogs will eat them. But the eggs really are nutritious, and millions of birds depend on it. Also, humans depend on it because their blood of horseshoe crabs, which is copper-based, is harvested and gotten to several labs, and they make a serum or bacteria, gram-negative bacteria testing material called it's a lysate testing program. Test, and it's used all over the world to taste for impurities, to test for bacterial impurities in vaccines, anything that is injectable, or like heart valves, anything that goes in it. The purity of it is checked with horseshoe crab blood. Pretty cool. So there are other simpler animals like the fiddler crabs. And fiddlers, we have 4 species along our coast. 3 of them are common, one's very rare, but they dig down in the sand, and you can see the big pellets here are excavation pellets. As the crab digs a hole down maybe 1.5 feet or so, and they have little chambers. They go in and out. These little tiny pellets are feeding pellets. So as they dig the holes, which they do every single tide, they throw this up on the surface, and then they walk around and they scrape the surface of the sand and ingest sand and diatoms and detritus, which is partly decomposing plant material, and they feed on it, and then they go back in the hole at high tide and stay there until the tide comes out again. You can see they cover the entire surface of the intertidal, sandy intertidal habitat every day, every tide, except during the winter. Pretty cool. All right, now, how these islands come to be, and this is something we talked about, this grass. This, again, is Spartina alterniflora. There is a new name for it. Some people have proposed calling it Spirobolus, but I think Spartina sounds prettier, so I'm going to use that, and you'll know what I mean. But anyway, this grass has several crops a year. You can see the brown stuff is a crop that has died. They got a new one coming up. This stuff will snap off in stormy winds or wave action, and then it floats out to the rivers, gets carried out to sea, and then the wind often blows it back on the beaches. And this is one of the more spectacular straw dunes I've ever seen. This covered the entire length of almost our whole coast, up to several feet thick and maybe 30 or 40 feet wide. And it affected the success of sea turtles nesting that year. They had to crawl over this up into the upper dunes to be able to get to bare sand. But this material acts like a snow fence, traps windblown sand, and that's what moves sand around a lot. You have rivers moving it down to the coast, tides moving it back and forth, waves throw it up onto a beach, wind, it dries out, and then wind blows it until it's trapped by something, which this plant here provides snow fencing, you might say, to trap sand. But then, once that happens, little dunes build, and then this plant here, sea oats, begins growing, and sea oats are amazing plant. They can grow very rapidly and to keep ahead of the building dunes, and they are the reason we have sea oats and a few other grasses are the reason we have dunes out there now. And dunes form a barrier against wave action, which would wash across the island, and sand is easily moved around by water. So with these plants growing here, it is helping hold the sand in place and also to build islands. So dune lines build, and every one of these dune lines had another event, you might say, of the marsh grass floating out. And then you have grasses grow. You have, this is a shrub here called marsh alder. You get wax myrtle, more of that growing. Eventually, you can get pine forests growing, which are a pioneer species. And then you get maritime forest, and maritime forests are dominated by hardwoods. They're sort of shady underneath because they're evergreen, and they're a very storm-resistant and fire-resistant type of forest. And they are what's called the climax forest here. Very, very cool forest. So they have other trees that will grow up, emerging. You can see it's fairly open underneath. This is a huge red cedar, one of the biggest ones I've ever seen on the coast. And but we have these spectacular maritime forests, and these forests are dominated by hardwoods. As I said, one of the main ones is live oaks and other oaks, but live oaks are important because they're very durable trees. They have very strong wood. In fact, their wood was so strong that it was used for building ships. You could use a curved timber like that and use it for making a rib of a ship that has a natural curve to it. And shipbuilders in the 1800s, 1800s really prized live oak from the southern southeastern coast. But this tree also produces mast, and mast are acorns. Acorns are a vital food for wildlife. Native Americans used them also. It was a very interesting type of habitat and connection. Now, the forests here are called maritime forests, but we have those further north, and these are subtropical forests. Can anyone come up with an idea of what a subtropical plant would be, or what is some indicator of subtropical plants that we have on the coast of Georgia? Maritime forests are found in Virginia, but they don't have the same kind of tropical plants we do. Okay.
You can type those answers to John's question in the chat box. I know some people have already responded. 2 responses, John, were saw palmetto, and then 3 different types of palms. Okay.
Very good. The palms are one of the major indicators of subtropical environments. And in Georgia, we have 4 native palms. The biggest one is called cabbage palmetto. That's this guy here. And you see them along highways, on roadways. It's sort of an interesting little note. These are wild-grown palms here. And if you look along Victory Drive in Savannah or some other areas that have palms, you'll notice that up about 10 feet that the trunk will narrow down very much. It's sort of a constricted area in the trunk. And if you look at them, that constricted area is the same height all the way down the road. And the reason is that tree was transplanted when it was about that high. And they cut all the roots off when they transplant them. And for a few years, it didn't have enough root structure to keep make a stronger, thicker trunk. And so it has a little constriction in it. But anyway, this is sable palmetto. And it's, yes, the name palmetto, people generally call plants palmetto, but it's the species of this plant is true palmetto. Palmetto just means small palm. This is the blue palmetto or a sable minor, sometimes called the swamp palm, and it grows further north than any other species, and it's related to this one, but it's mature at this size, and you can see that's a flower spike coming out that had flowers with seeds on it. So they're a much smaller plant, but they grow up into North Carolina for sure. So good. Also, another plant we have are interesting ones called bromeliads. And the bromeliads sound like a scary name, you might say, but it's the pineapple family. And Spanish moss, which anyone living in the South is familiar with, is not a moss at all. It's actually, we call it Spanish moss now. The Spaniards call it French beard. And I don't know what the Spaniards called it, but they didn't call it Spanish moss. Anyway, John Muir called it long moss. It's Tillandsia usinoides, which means it's in the Bromeliaceae family, and it is related to pineapple. And it's a flowering plant. It has really, when it gets this stage, no roots. It gets everything from the air, moisture, dust, all its nutrients come right from the air. We have relatives of Spanish moss here. This is called ball moss, same genus, but you can see it looks sort of like Spanish moss, but a little stiffer leaves. And this is a flower spike, and that's a seed pod right there. And both Spanish moss and the other bromeliads reproduce by wind-blown seeds. So that pod, when it's ripe, will split open, and the seeds have little parachutes on them. That's true for Spanish moss too, which will blow through the air and tangle on a branch and start the cycle again. So anyway, so that's very good. Yeah, palms are a good indicator. Now, another interesting thing on these islands, we have dunes, we have the maritime forest, but we also have a type of habitat that grows. We have freshwater habitats, and on the islands we call them sloughs, freshwater sloughs. And there's freshwater right there. And on the islands, I just wonder, the islands are surrounded by salt water, and actually salt water goes under the islands. And sand is very porous, so the salt water can penetrate under it. But there's freshwater habitat on the island. And I wonder if anyone knows where it comes from. How do we get fresh water on the islands?
So you will notice that a poll has appeared on your screen. So you're looking for that box that has a green header. And your options for where does the freshwater lens come from on our barrier islands in Georgia? Is it springs, rain, or freshwater rivers? And thank you all for everyone who's participating. I can see votes coming in. It seems like we've got answers for all three. We'll give it just a few more seconds because I do see some more coming in. And no worries if you're not sure, you can take a wild guess. We appreciate all the participation. Fantastic. Well, we're going to go ahead and end polling and share the results so that you can see what people thought. It looks like 29% of people thought it was springs, 46% thought it was rain, and 25% thought it was freshwater rivers.
Mm-hmm. There we go. And it is rain is the answer where that water comes from. It is a source for what we call surficial water. That's water on the surface. Now, on the islands, and something that leads us to confusion, people lived on these islands for years, and they would dig what was called artesian wells, which go down hundreds of feet into what's called artesian aquifer. Now, that is not connected to the surface water, although some of the wells they used to pump full of ponds. They had freshwater ponds on the island that they would dig an artesian well in, and water would just flow naturally out of the ground into that pond with under pressure. But the groundwater, if you were to go in the middle of the woods on this island anywhere and dig a hole, you would hit fresh water. If you kept going down another 20 or 30 feet, you'd hit salt water. And to get artesian water, you'd have to go really deep. So the water we drink now is artesian, but there are no natural springs on any of the coast here, the island, the coastal islands. There are artesian wells that some of them function as a permanent flow. Although once a lot of water began being used by industry and by residents as the coast developed, a lot of these wells, naturally flowing wells, quit flowing. But the fresh water here comes from rain. So when you have a lot of rain, like we are now, the sloughs are full of water, and there are a lot of plants. This is marshmallows, which are a type of hibiscus that grow, and you have cattails. Many cool plants live in these. I'm a zoologist mainly, and so I'm intrigued by everything. I'm a naturalist, but one of the cool animals that uses these freshwater habitats on all of our coastal islands is the alligator. And alligators are what's called a keystone species. They're vital to the ecology of the coast because they dig holes, and those holes, they wallow them up. This is a gator hole, been wallowed up by alligator. You'll see a little path through there. That's a gator trail, and it actually goes all the way down this marsh out into salt water. And most of the adult alligators on our islands go out into the salt water to get food. But they have this freshwater habitats here to have their baby. These are little hatchlings, and you can see duckweed growing. That doesn't grow in salt water. And baby alligators need fresh water to live in. The adults can go back and forth between fresh and salt water. But this hole here, you see there's fish, there's thousands of fish in it, some frogs, other things. But during droughts, the ponds dry up because we have droughts every year, and some years that's worse than others. This is a gator hole, a wallow, similar to the one you just saw. There are thousands of little fish in there. This is a slide. You can see that's when alligators been going back and forth. There's a hole going down deep, and all this dirt came out of that hole. This is a gator den, and alligators dig both of these structures. This hole here, which they dig for themselves, is really an oasis where fish, frogs, deer drink out of them. You'll notice these are all deer tracks. They're drinking out of the gator hole. There's water down here with fish in it also. So alligators create an oasis. They are a keystone species, providing habitat for many other animals. They travel back and forth on the same routes, and they keep channels open when the waters are up that fish can utilize these channels easily. So now, this is an interesting animal here, and there are amphibians that use the water in these freshwater sloughs. We have salamanders on this island, not so many on some of the outer barrier islands, but we have this. Does anyone know, I've got a little question. Does anyone know what the state amphibian of Georgia is? And we didn't have one until a group of fourth graders petitioned state legislature to come up with one, and they proposed one that is now our state amphibian.
So we do have some responses coming in, John. Some for frog and some more specifically for common green tree frog.
Well, there you go. Well, both of those are right, but the green tree frog, this is an animal right here, which is a cool. They're called as you probably heard them. They are the state amphibian in Georgia, and I think they're a good one. But anyway, in that fourth grade class, I forget the county inland, came up with the idea, and the legislature, they usually disagree on something, but I think they all thought that was a good idea. So it probably got a unanimous vote. But that's it. All right. We do have animals such as salamanders. This island, which is a back barrier, because when sea level was lower, this island existed. It's about 45,000 years old. The outer barrier island here, Wausau, is only about 600 years old. The outer part of it, the inner, may be 1600 or 1800 years old, but it's always surrounded by seawater. This island, when sea level was lower, we were surrounded by freshwater habitat. And so many salamanders are here. These are a cool salamander called the slimy salamander, one of about 10 species found here. Other animals that benefit from the alligator habitats are wading birds. And wading birds often nest in trees like this that are emergent from water. And on a drought year, when there's no water there, alligators don't hang around under the rookeries. And so wading birds sometimes don't even bother to nest that year. But if the water's up and alligators are patrolling underneath, wading birds have a successful nesting. Now, the alligators are protecting them, not on purpose. The alligators are hoping a baby bird will fall out of the nest. But they're protecting them by eating other predators that may go out there. So humans first discovered our coast maybe 12,000 years ago. At that time, it was seaward of where it is now. We have evidence on this island that humans had permanent settlements at least 4,500 years ago, and they left really good evidence by leaving the main food source, which was oysters. They began making clay pots over 4,000 years ago, and those were the earliest ceramics or fired clay in North America. But they were here. Following them, we had a series of the colonial settlers, and they began clearing land, putting in plantations and farms on the islands. They left their mark there. But early on, the very first sort of environmental changes that happened here from Europe, Hernando de Soto in the 1500s arrived, and he brought with him hogs. I think he had 13 sows, probably some boars, and they began breeding, and hogs breed very rapidly. Some of them escaped, maybe some were released, and they began spreading. And feral hogs are not native to Asia and Europe. They're not native here, but they spread, and now they're an environmental problem. They do dig up plants, they'll root up sea oats, they eat turtle eggs, a lot of things. Interesting animals, but they are an exotic animal that's causing problems. Some of the other animals were cuter, you might say. These are donkeys, and on Ossabaw Island, about 10 donkeys were brought up there in the 1950s. They soon multiplied to over 150. Mrs. Eleanor Torrey West, she realized there was a problem, and so they decided to remove. She found homes for about 90 of them, and there's only 8 of them left out there now, but they've been sterilized, and but they're really cool animals. They're very long-lived. But the first horses that arrived here, they would have been feeding them hay on the ships. When they got here, they went to the bathroom, and they dropped seeds from Europe on the ground that began spreading. So some of the weeds we have in our yards come from European seeds transmitted in the guts of horses. We have other animals like the armadillo that's been in the southeast from the 1920s. They reached Georgia in the 1950s. This county, Chatham County, they reached here in about 1978 or 9. They reached this island only about 3 years ago, but they're here. They're already in North Carolina. They're native to Mexico, and they've spread naturally into Texas and eastward from there, and then they were released in Florida, but they're here. We have things that come in accidentally in the hulls of ships. This is the giant barnacle from the Pacific Ocean. You can see the white ones are our regular native barnacles, but these others get gigantic. They're here. We do have, you hear about the southeastern snakes in Florida. We do have those here, a southeastern snake. But this is it. This is called a Brahmian blind snake, and they're full grown. Their earthworms get bigger, but they are snake. They're parthenogenic, meaning they're only female, so every single one of them can lay eggs. And they're also called flower pot snakes because they burrow in flower pots and soil, damp soil. They feed on termite and ant eggs and larvae, so they don't seem to be bothering anything. But they are here now, and they're the most widespread snake in the world. They're the smallest one in our country. but a cool little snake. We have sometime diseases that come in. And in the 1970s in Georgia, a little beetle was introduced that had an affinity for red bay and other trees. The beetle burrows into the plant. It infects it with a fungus, which kills it. And it killed millions of red bay trees, which are relative to avocado. Now, we do have seeds that come here floating up. These are seeds. All of these, they weren't all in one place, but these are all seeds I found floated up on beaches here. We have coconuts, of course. That's a calabash. This is a mangrove propagule. This is called a sea heart. We have pandana seeds. I call that a hamburger seed. Anyway, but these all float up, a yellow knicker right there on the beaches, and they are viable. I have found sprouted coconuts out there, mangrove propagules. I have some growing now. So a lot of these seeds will grow, but why aren't they growing here now? Anyway, why aren't they taking over?
Those are such cool seeds, John. And for folks in the audience, you will see that there is a poll now. Why don't the tropical seeds that wash up on Georgia's beaches grow here? So even though they can sprout, why don't you see large amounts of them growing on our beaches? Your options are not enough rain, it occasionally freezes or is too cold, or it's too salty. And I do see some answers coming in, so that's awesome. And thank you. I know you've had a number of questions, and we will get to those in just a few minutes during our Q&A period. And the same with the hands raised. We definitely see you and appreciate the participation, but can't unmute folks at this point. But we will take questions in the chat box in just a few minutes. Wonderful. Well, it looks like a lot of folks have responded, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. It looks like 13% of people thought it was not enough rain. Most people, 54%, thought that it was because it occasionally freezes or it's too cold, and 33% thought it was too salty.
Right. Well, yes, we have occasional freezes. Right down in Florida, these same seeds wash up on the beaches, and they'll grow there. Coconuts grow in the tropics easily. So these seeds all of these will grow down in Florida where we don't have freezes in South Florida. And it's getting warmer here every year. So I want to say that, so you younger people in your lifetime, you're going to see mangroves growing on the Georgia coast. They grow in the tropics. They grow in the intertidal habitat where we have marsh grasses growing now. Right, they've been moving further north in Florida, and they're growing around Jacksonville right now. So anyway, cool. Very good. Good thinking. We have manatees here, which are extending their range northward. And I've just been getting reports the last couple of days of manatees swimming into the grass. That high tide, they feed on the cord grass. And their numbers are up in Florida, but they still are threatened by boats. You can see that white thing. That's a boat propeller scar on the back of this manatee. But their numbers are utilizing Georgia waters in greater numbers every year. We have this guy here. This is not a fiddler crab on steroids, but this is a giant land crab native to the tropics. They are here. They live in burrows. They survive the winters by being in those burrows. And a lot of times people who've been there their whole life, they might see one and they realize they've never seen one in their whole life, but they are here. I found them, or people have brought them to me in my whole lifetime. So cool animal. We have migrating butterflies along the coast here. These are tiger swallowtails. But we have a variety of sulfurs and monarchs and Gulf fritillaries all migrate along our coast. We do have changing habitats here, and that is caused by wave action. This is a boneyard beach on the front of an island, and this was a maritime forest that was killed by sand being wave action washing in, the sand being washed away, and then the trees dying. Remember, live oaks are such durable trees, they'll stay around for years and years on the beaches. But this looks like a dead area, but there are thousands of barnacles and shellfish and other stuff living in there. So it's a great habitat for benthic animals that attach. But another type of change that's happening is sea levels rising. Remember we said that. And we have evidence of that all along our coast. This is what's called a ghost forest. And this is protected but behind the barrier island. Waves never hit it here. But what is happening every year, comes up, sea level comes up maybe 3 millimeters more. And over time, the whole coast is being inundated. And much of the marshes we see out there today, underlying that grass, are dead, preserved trees. It's anaerobic soil, so sometimes the trees fall down here and they just get buried. But it's moving, and you can see it actually happening on a lot of our coasts. So anyway, I hope the coast is wild, stays wild here, and I know you all have been very interested in it. It's a beautiful place. I hope you get out there. With this COVID-19 problem, it's we're all having to do different things, but the coast is out there and getting better all the time. So hopefully, when this is passed, we'll be able to get out and enjoy it. And so sea turtles are crawling back in. They'll be hatching. They'll be hatching about in another couple of weeks, maybe, and then they'll be going back into sea. It takes about 30 days, 60 days for the nest to hatch. And hopefully you'll all be able to get out on a beautiful wild beach and enjoy it. So anyway, and when you get out there, until then, wear your mask. Everyone wear a mask. Okay, I'm ready for questions, Kayla.
Fantastic. While John is sharing his screen so that we can see him a little bit larger, I do want to also add that we have a number of activities that you can do at home. So that includes some stewardship shorts with tips for how to responsibly explore if you're going out to a maritime forest or a beach if you live on the coast. And that's all downloadable from the event posting where you signed up for this class. And then we also have a list of activities that you can do even from your own home or in your neighborhood to get out exploring. So everything from looking at spider eyes to doing a mini scavenger hunt.
I got one other thing here, Kayla. I meant to talk, the Native Americans found plenty of food here, and they found caffeine, which it seems like we all love having caffeine. This is yaupon holly, grows along our coast, and the leaves are very distinctive. They have they don't have the spines of English holly, but you can see the little serrations. They're separate male and female plants. Only the females have berries. You can make tea out of this. I pick the leaves, dry them till they crumble up, and then I use a level tablespoon of dried yaupon leaves to about 6 ounces of water, steep it for about 8 minutes, and it's delicious.
Wonderful. And it really is good. I didn't have yaupon holly tea until I started working here with John, and it is really good. But we've had a number of questions throughout the program. We may not get to all of them, so we'll do a follow-up email if we can't get to everyone's question. We did have a question about whether or not there are any efforts to eradicate or control the laurel wilt that is impacting the red bays. So the disease you said that's wiping out the red bays.
Right. Yeah, it's well, what's happened is it's in a forest, it's almost impossible. I mean, you can't treat it's killed off all the adult trees. There's a lot of sprouts coming up called root suckers in places, but it's almost impossible to do that. If you had a farm or a field. Now, let me say this. The beetles spread, once it got here, began spreading inland. It got to Florida, and it discovered they were growing relatives of red bay in nice straight lines, and those were avocados. Red bay is a close relative of avocado, the same genus. And you can treat an avocado orchard, but you can't treat a forest very easily. So there seems to be no way. Hopefully, it'll die down. I have a red bay. I don't know if Aletha is online here with us today, but she gave me a little baby red bay now, a tree years and years ago, and now it's about 35 to 40 feet high, and it's the biggest one anywhere around. And the beetles haven't found it yet, but I'll keep worrying they will.
That sounds like such an awesome tree. We had another question about trees. This one had to do with the picture that you had of the rookery with the egrets. Mm-hmm. And she was wondering, why do those trees die when you have so many egrets there over a period of time? One thing bird rookeries do in general, they drop a lot of feces. And feces, of course, can be very caustic on plant life. If you have a pond with a lot of wading birds, often the pond will become eutrophoric. It'll get so much nutrient in it, the nutrients, it'll cause a bloom of algae and can be a problem. Some of the little islands where
shorebirds and terns nests. Their feces will kill the vegetation, and then they'll move to another island. So that may be what's happening there. Sometime that could be it. They might actually pick at the leaves. Sometimes baby birds are picking at leaves on trees too. So that's a very good question. Not all trees seem to have the problem that in my picture had. Yeah.
Fascinating. We also had a question about horseshoe crabs. I do want to make a plug for anyone who's interested in horseshoe crabs. Later in July, we're going to do a program all about horseshoe crabs. We'll bring out some of the live ones from our tank. So tune into that. But this person was wondering, can horseshoe crabs live in cold places?
They do. They live all the way up north. They sort of, one of the center point of their prevalence is around Delaware Bay, and they live up into Maine, I believe. There's one species. They also, same species, live down into the tropics. We have probably the biggest size horseshoe crabs anywhere in the world. The females here can be 3 feet long. They're bigger than the males, but they do live in colder waters. There's some specific horseshoe crabs too, but we have the main one we have here, Polynice. It's Limulus. Limulus is the genus in there.
Such cool animals.
Yeah.
We had another, they really are. We had another question about animals that you can find on the coast. Mm-hmm. This one was about land crabs. Mm-hmm. And this person noticed that there were hundreds of tiny land crabs when they were walking along our J. Wolf nature trail the other week. And they're wondering if those are related to the giant land crab that you showed a picture of.
No, the giant land crabs come here as a planktonic larva, and so they're isolated. There's probably not enough of them to have a breeding population, but their larvae carried with Gulf Stream waters and all northward, and if they find a good spot, they'll grow. At the Pinpoint Museum, there's a land crab has a burrow there. But anyway, what they're finding, they are most likely several species. If they're in the woods, they're called squarebacks or wharf crabs, and they live. They travel way inland. They'll actually climb up in trees. They're a land crab, but that is full grown. When you see the ones there on the ground, that's them. The giant land crabs live in burrows. They only come out at night, and you would not. They're not common enough for people to see them. But the squarebacks, and right after some of the hurricanes, I was getting a lot of calls about people worried about crab plagues. But the waters went higher in the hurricane, and the squareback or wharf crabs just went with it, and then they were looking for a place to hide, and I guess someone's garage was a good place to escape from the sun. But so that's my guess is what they're talking about are, and they would be on the nature trail in the woods, and those would be called a wharf crab or squareback.
Wonderful. We do have a number of other questions about animals. Mm-hmm. I will make a plug that for folks that are interested in animals that might use the maritime forest habitat, or our beaches, I would encourage you to tune back in next Tuesday at 11 o'clock a.m. Aquarium director and marine educator Ann Lindsay is going to be leading us on a detective puzzle to try and figure out, looking at different skulls, what species they are. So that would be a chance to learn more about the animals living in these habitats. We also had a question about species of sharks, and on Friday we'll be diving all into sharks and rays. But I wanted to circle back to some questions for you, John, that are kind of specific to this one, having to do with sea level rise. So folks were curious, one, what makes the sea level rise? And then how long ago was it so much higher? And we've got about 2 minutes left.
Okay, well, sea level is rising because the Earth's warming, the ice caps are melting. They go into the ocean and sea level rises. When the Earth gets colder during an ice age, the last one reached a peak about 18,000 years ago. Sea level got colder. I mean, the Earth got colder, ice formed on the Greenland and elsewhere, and then sea level dropped. This island formed when sea level was about 5 feet higher. The barriers in about in the last million years, we've had a fluctuation of ice ages. It went up and down, and so some were higher by 100 feet or more, and then some were lower by 300 feet. So the temperature of the Earth, gradual temperature, we're entering a warm stage now. Sea levels are rising at a very rapid rate. And I'm willing to answer any questions. People can email me, and I'll try to answer the questions too. So,
Yes, this is awesome. Thank you all so much for your fantastic questions and for participating. We are just about out of time. So I did want to share a couple of things. One is that we do really value your feedback. This is the first summer that we've done virtual programs. So we do have a 1-minute evaluation. The link to that is in the chat box. So go ahead and click on that now or copy and paste it into a new tab because once we end this program, that chat box will disappear. And similarly, if you are interested in doing some of the at-home activities and explorations, you can go ahead and either copy and paste or open up those links from the chat box at this time. If you aren't in a place where you can download them right now, if you go back to the event posting, that's where you can find the downloadable activities as well. And a big thank you to all of our friends of the aquarium that are watching in the audience. We really do appreciate your support as it helps us be able to put on these educational programs. And we also, if you're interested in becoming a friend of the aquarium, you can find all of that on our website as well. And in the last minute or so that we have, I'm wondering, John, if you could tell us how to look for spider eyes.
Well, that's good. Well, spiders have very reflective eyes. Wolf spiders, the ones that hunt by sight. So you can go out at night, take a flashlight. It's got to have a pretty strong beam, a direct beam, not a broad thing. But if you put it on your nose, so like this, and then sight down it and walk around. Usually, if it's moist, it's better underneath moist leaves or grasses or things like that. And just sign down it, and if you sight down the beam, you'll see this little greenish reflections come back, very jewel-like. And if you follow the light, go over to it, you'll see their little spiders. And we used to tell people, I can smell a spider over there, and then you'd go and there'd be a spider, but we were actually seeing the reflection of their eyes. But it's amazing how many wolf spiders are out there, and they're harmless to us. They're feeding on insects, so they're a cool thing. But you'll be surprised how many are in your yards. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, John. That's super fun. Definitely something that people can do at home. The other thing that we include on that activity sheet that I'm wondering if you could describe a little more is what is a 4-inch hike? If someone wants to take a 4-inch hike.
Well, I have a little microscope like this. And what I used to do is we wanted taking people on field trips. I did a lot of camping expeditions, and everyone would have one. And we'd go to say, okay, we're going to go. We've been on 4-mile hikes. We're going to go on a 4-inch hike, and we'd find something like a tree or the ground, leaves, and you could use some sort of magnifying thing and just look at it closely, and then just go about 3 or 4 inches along it, looking at detail of what's there, and you'll be amazed at how much life is there just within a small area. So just a way of focusing and coming up with a lichen-covered branches are really spectacular. So it's been, thank you so much, folks, and I've enjoyed that.
Well, thank you so much, John. This has been wonderful and fascinating, and I hope that if people had fun, that you continue to tune into our programs every Tuesday at 11 a.m. We've got programs for 9 to 14 with an adult, and then on Thursdays for ages 4 to 8 with an adult. And then a few others, like our Friday Lunch and Learn, is open to all ages. So you can find a full schedule of those events on our website. And other than that, we hope you have a great week and look forward to seeing you virtually in the future. See you later, alligators.
Put it on.